My name is Samantha Reynolds, 34, and I've never screamed so loudly in my entire life. Standing in my own mountain lodge's doorway, I found myself face to face with my sister Kimberly, lounging on my couch like she owned the place. Behind her, her husband Brian and his entire family were scattered throughout my cabin, their belongings strewn everywhere. "What are you doing here?" I whispered, clutching the deed papers I'd brought to refinance. Kimberly smirked. "Dad left it to both of us. Didn't you know?" My knees buckled as I realized the magnitude of this betrayal. If you've ever had family stab you in the back, you know exactly how I felt in that moment. I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you've ever had to deal with toxic family members trying to take what's yours. Hit that like button if you're ready to hear how I fought back and reclaimed what was rightfully mine, and subscribe to catch more true family drama stories that prove blood isn't always thicker than water. To understand why finding Kimberly in my lodge felt like such a violation, I need to back up a bit. I'm Samantha Reynolds, a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions at a prestigious firm in New York. My life had always been meticulously planned and executed until last year, when my husband Mark decided that our 10-year marriage had run its course. Translation: he'd been sleeping with his 26-year-old personal trainer for 8 months. The divorce was messy, public, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my life. My mental health took a serious hit. I started having panic attacks during client meetings, something that had never happened before. I'd find myself hyperventilating in bathroom stalls between depositions, mascara running down my face as I tried to pull myself together. My boss noticed, my colleagues noticed, and eventually, I had to acknowledge that I was falling apart. The mountain lodge was supposed to be my salvation. My father, Thomas Reynolds, built it as his retirement dream home in Aspen Peak, Colorado, after 30 years working as an aerospace engineer. He'd always loved the mountains, and the isolation they provided suited his introverted personality perfectly. When he first showed me the property 15 years ago, I immediately fell in love with the 3-bedroom cabin nestled among towering pines, overlooking a crystal-clear lake. "This is where I'll spend my golden years," Dad had said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "And someday, it'll be your sanctuary too." That promise meant everything to me, especially since I had contributed substantially to making his dream a reality. I'd paid for half of the construction costs as an investment for Dad, draining my savings account right after law school. I had the documentation to prove it a fact that would become incredibly important later. Dad passed away 8 months ago from a sudden heart attack. I was devastated. We'd always been close, especially after Mom died when I was in college. Kimberly and I were his only children, and according to his will, at least the version I had seen, his assets were to be divided equally between us, with specific provisions for certain items. The mountain lodge, given my financial contribution and our shared love for it, was explicitly left to me. Kimberly, my younger sister by 3 years, had always been the family's free spirit. Where I was driven and focused, she drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship. Our father loved us both equally, but it was no secret that Kimberly often resented my achievements and what she perceived as favoritism. 2 years ago, she had finally settled down, marrying Brian Davidson, whose family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Northeast. The last conversation I had with Dad before his death still rings in my ears. It was on the phone, just 2 weeks before he died. "Sammy," he said, using the nickname from my childhood, "I've been thinking about the lodge. I want you to know it's yours, just like we always planned. You paid for half of it, and I know how much it means to you." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, not thinking much of it. "We'd discussed this many times before." "No, listen," he insisted, his voice suddenly serious. "I need you to know that it's your sanctuary. No matter what happens, the lodge is yours." I didn't understand the urgency in his voice at the time. Now, standing face to face with Kimberly in that very lodge, his words took on a completely new meaning. After another panic attack at work left me sobbing in my office at 2 a.m., I knew I needed a break. I decided to take 3 weeks off the longest vacation I'd had since starting at the firm 8 years ago. The mountain lodge seemed like the perfect escape. Isolation, fresh air, and memories of happier times with Dad were exactly what I needed. I spent days preparing for the trip. I cleared my schedule, passed my active cases to colleagues, and packed everything I'd need for extended solitude. Books I'd been meaning to read for years, hiking gear, and comfort food. The 6-hour drive from the airport to Aspen Peak was cathartic. As the urban landscape gave way to rolling hills and eventually the majestic Rocky Mountains, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders for the first time in months. The winding road up to the lodge was familiar and comforting, with tall pines creating a natural tunnel. As I rounded the final curve, my heart jumped at the sight of the A-frame cabin perched on the hillside. But something was wrong. 3 unfamiliar cars were parked in the driveway, and lights blazed from every window. I parked behind a luxury SUV. I didn't recognize and approached the front door with growing apprehension. Using my key, I pushed open the heavy wooden door to find my world completely upended. The interior of the lodge had been transformed. Where Dad's worn leather armchair once stood was now an expensive-looking sectional sofa. The rustic decor had been replaced with modern art pieces and sleek furniture that didn't belong in a mountain cabin. Shoes I didn't recognize lined the entryway, and luggage was stacked near the staircase. But most jarring of all was the sight of my sister lounging on a new couch where Dad's favorite sitting area used to be. She was scrolling through her phone, feet propped up on a glass coffee table that definitely wasn't there the last time I visited. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted from shock to something more calculated. "Samantha, what a surprise," she said, her voice unnaturally high. "We weren't expecting you." "Clearly," I responded, still frozen in the doorway. "What are you doing here, Kimberly? And whose stuff is this?" Before she could answer, a man appeared from the kitchen, Brian, my brother-in-law. I'd only met him twice before, at their wedding and at Dad's funeral. Behind him trailed an older couple I recognized as his parents, Gerald and Nancy Davidson, and a younger man who looked enough like Brian to be his brother. "Samantha," Brian exclaimed with forced joviality, "welcome to the family lodge. Can I get you something to drink? We have an excellent Cabernet open." "Family lodge?" I echoed, my voice rising. "What are you talking about? This is my lodge. Dad left it to me." Kimberly stood up, smoothing her designer jeans. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Dad left the lodge to both of us. I have the will right here." She walked to a drawer in the kitchen, a drawer that used to hold Dad's fishing maps, and pulled out a document. She handed it to me with what looked like triumph in her eyes. I scanned the pages quickly, my legal training kicking in. It appeared to be a valid will, dated 3 weeks before Dad's death, stating that the mountain property was to be jointly owned by Kimberly and me. This contradicted everything I knew, everything Dad had told me, and the will I had seen after his death. "This isn't right," I said, my voice shaking. "I have documentation showing I paid for half of this property. Dad and I had an agreement. He told me explicitly that the lodge would be mine." "Well, people change their minds," Kimberly shrugged. "Dad clearly wanted to be fair to both his daughters." Brian stepped forward, his hand on Kimberly's shoulder. "Samantha, we understand this might be confusing for you, but the legal documents are quite clear. This is now a shared family property, and we've decided to make some updates to bring it into this century." His condescending tone made my blood boil. I pulled out my phone and the folder of documents I'd brought for the bank, showing the original agreement between Dad and me, the checks I'd written, and correspondence confirming my partial ownership. "This proves I have a financial stake in this property beyond inheritance," I insisted. "Dad couldn't have just given away something I partially owned without my consent." Gerald, Brian's father, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all sit down for dinner and discuss this like adults. Nancy has prepared a lovely roast." The suggestion that we should break bread together while they were actively stealing my property was absurd, but I was outnumbered and needed time to think. I reluctantly agreed to stay for dinner, if only to gather more information about what was happening. Dinner was excruciating. I was treated like a guest in my own home, with Nancy proudly showing off the new china she'd bought for the cabin, and Kevin, Brian's brother, discussing plans to build a boat dock on their lake. Throughout the meal, Kimberly made passive-aggressive comments about my divorce and career. It must be so lonely at the top, she said, refilling her wine glass. No husband, no kids, just work. At least now you can visit us here whenever you need family time. I bit my tongue until it nearly bled. After dinner, I refused to leave. I'll be staying in Dad's room, I announced. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Actually, Brian said, Gerald and Nancy have taken the master bedroom, but the small guest room upstairs is available if you'd like to stay the night. The small guest room. In my own property. The indignity of it burned, but I wasn't about to be driven away. I needed time to figure out what was happening and how to fight back. That night, as I lay on the twin bed in the cramped guest room that used to be a storage space, I heard a knock at my door. It was Gerald, Brian's father, offering me a nightcap. I thought you might want some company, he said, handing me a glass of bourbon. This must all be very confusing for you. I accepted the drink, but not his false sympathy. It's not confusing at all. This property is mine, and someone has manipulated the situation. Gerald settled into the room's only chair. You know, the Davidsons have always valued family legacy. This place will make a wonderful vacation home for all of us, Brian and Kimberly's future children included. Surely you can see the benefit of keeping it in the family rather than hoarding it for yourself. The audacity of his statement left me speechless. After he left, I lay awake all night, furious, and plotting my next move. One thing was certain: I wasn't going to let the Davidsons or my sister steal what was rightfully mine. I woke at dawn, hours before anyone else would be up. This was my chance to explore the lodge without interference. Quietly, I padded through the cabin that no longer felt like home. The changes were even more obvious in the daylight. Family photos had been removed. Dad's collection of vintage fishing lures was nowhere to be seen. And even the hand-carved banister he had made himself had been replaced with something more modern. But more concerning than these aesthetic changes were the signs of permanence. Mail addressed to Kimberly and Brian sat on the counter, and a calendar on the refrigerator showed dentist appointments and social engagements stretching months into the future. I made my way to Dad's study, or what used to be his study. The room had been converted into some kind of home office for Brian, with an expensive-looking desk and computer setup. I tried the desk drawers, finding most of them empty or filled with Brian's paperwork. But when I tried the bottom drawer, I noticed something odd. It didn't slide as smoothly as the others, and the wood around the lock was slightly splintered, as if it had been forced open. This had been Dad's private drawer, where he kept important documents. I remembered him showing me once where he hid the key in a false bottom of the desk lamp. I checked, and the key was gone. I needed answers, and I knew just who to call. Rachel Goldstein had been my roommate in law school and now worked at a prestigious firm specializing in estate law. I slipped outside to make the call. Rachel? It's Sam. I need your help. I explained the situation rapidly. That sounds suspicious as hell, she replied after listening. Do you have a copy of the will you saw initially? It's with my lawyer in New York. I never thought I'd need it here. Get it. And in the meantime, you should talk to your dad's estate attorney. Something doesn't add up. By the time I returned inside, the house was stirring. I made an excuse about needing to run into town for toiletries and escaped before anyone could offer to accompany me. William Jenkins, my father's estate attorney, had a small office above the hardware store in town. He seemed nervous when I walked in, unannounced. Samantha, what a surprise. I thought you were in New York. I was. Now I'm here because there seems to be some confusion about my father's will. Jenkins shuffled papers on his desk, avoiding my gaze. Yes, well, these matters can be complicated. Not really, I countered. Either my father left the lodge to me, as he always intended, and as he told me directly, or something changed at the last minute without my knowledge. After some pressing, Jenkins admitted that the will had indeed been modified 3 weeks before my father's death. Your sister brought him in. He seemed determined to make the change. Was anyone else present? I asked. Jenkins hesitated. Mr. Davidson Brian accompanied them. My suspicions deepened. Was my father of sound mind when he made these changes? Jenkins looked uncomfortable. He was coherent, but between you and me, he seemed different. Confused at times. He kept asking the same questions repeatedly. This was the first I'd heard of any cognitive issues. Dad had always been sharp as a tack. I pressed further, and Jenkins reluctantly admitted that he had recorded the meeting, as was his practice with all will modifications. I'd like to hear that recording, I said firmly. I'm not sure that would be appropriate without all parties. Mr. Jenkins, I interrupted, my lawyer voice taking over, withholding that recording could constitute obstruction if this becomes a legal matter. And I promise you, it will become a legal matter. He relented, and what I heard broke my heart. Dad's voice on the recording was unmistakably his, but his speech patterns were off. He sounded hesitant, confused. In the background, I could hear Kimberly's voice prompting him. Most damning of all, when Jenkins asked if he was making these changes of his own free will, there was a long pause before Dad responded affirmatively. As I left Jenkins' office, my phone buzzed with an email from Rachel. She had done some preliminary digging and found something interesting, a series of emails between Kimberly and Brian, dating back almost a year, discussing plans to secure the mountain property. The emails had been part of discovery in an unrelated business dispute involving the Davidson family. My next stop was the local medical center, where I knew Dad had received his health care. Dr. Martinez had been his physician for years. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss another patient's medical information, she said when I inquired about Dad's cognitive state before his death. He was my father, and I believe he may have been taken advantage of during a vulnerable time, I explained. I'm not asking for his full records, just confirmation of whether he was experiencing any cognitive decline. Dr. Martinez's expression softened. I can't give you specifics, but I will say this. I was concerned enough about your father's memory lapses in his final months that I referred him to a neurologist. Whether he ever went, I don't know. My investigation continued at the county records office, where I discovered something that made my blood run cold, a mortgage application in Kimberly and Brian's names for the lodge property, dated 2 weeks before Dad's death. They had been planning to take over the property before he had even passed away. On my way back to the lodge, I made one more stop, Frank Miller's hardware store. Frank had been Dad's friend and had helped with maintenance on the lodge for years. Frank, when was the last time you did work at the lodge? I asked after exchanging pleasantries. Oh, must have been about 10 months ago when I fixed that leaky roof, he replied. Though I did see some fancy contractors up there about 6 months back. Your sister's husband hired them for renovations, said they were preparing for your dad's long-term care. 6 months back would have been 2 months before Dad died. They had been planning this takeover for months, under the guise of preparing for Dad's care. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I remembered Dad's special hiding spot, a loose floorboard in his bedroom closet where he kept his personal journal. If I could access the master bedroom now occupied by Brian's parents, I might find Dad's own account of his final months. I returned to the lodge with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about honoring Dad's true wishes and exposing what appeared to be a calculated scheme to take advantage of him when he was vulnerable. I returned to the lodge that evening to find it transformed yet again. Cars lined the long driveway, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses echoed from inside. Kimberly and Brian had apparently decided to host a dinner party for what looked like 20 of their closest friends. I pushed through the front door to find the great room filled with well-dressed strangers, most holding wine glasses and admiring the renovations. Brian was playing host, leading a group tour around the property, as if he'd built it himself. And this reclaimed wood flooring was my idea, he was saying as I walked in. Thomas had such rustic tastes, but we've brought a more sophisticated aesthetic to the place. My blood boiled hearing him talk about my father's home that way. I spotted Kimberly by the fireplace, wearing an expensive-looking cocktail dress, chatting with a couple I didn't recognize. Kimberly, I said, approaching her directly. We need to talk. Now. She gave her guests an apologetic smile. My sister, she explained with a dismissive wave. She's going through a difficult time. Divorce, you know. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the kitchen. ignoring her protests. "What the hell is this?" I demanded once we were relatively alone. "You're hosting parties in a home you stole?" "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "These are Brian's business associates. And I didn't steal anything. The will is clear." Will you manipulated Dad into changing when he was showing signs of dementia?" I countered. "I talked to Jenkins and Dr. Martinez. And I found the mortgage application you and Brian filed before Dad even died." Kimberly's face paled slightly before she recovered her composure. "You're delusional. Dad was perfectly fine when he changed the will. He simply realized that I deserved a share of the property too." "Then explain this," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the emails Rachel had sent me. "You and Brian were plotting to secure this property months before Dad died. You're spying on us now? Going through our private emails?" Kimberly's voice rose in pitch. "That's illegal. They were part of public record in a business dispute," I replied calmly. "And they show clear intent to defraud." Something in her expression changed. A flicker of panic quickly masked by anger. "You always think you deserve everything because you're the successful one, don't you? Well, not this time. Dad wanted me to have this place too." "I have Dad's journal," I lied, watching her reaction carefully. "From his hiding spot in the closet, he documented everything: your visits, his confusion, his concerns about being pressured. It was a gamble, but it paid off." Kimberly's eyes darted involuntarily toward the master bedroom upstairs. The journal existed, and she knew where it was. "You're lying," she said, but her voice wavered. "I'm going to make this very public," I continued. "Every business associate out there will know what you and the Davidsons did to an elderly man suffering from cognitive decline." That was when Brian appeared, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, voice falsely pleasant. "Samantha is making ridiculous accusations," Kimberly said quickly. "She's threatening us." I turned to face Brian. "I know what you did. Manipulating my father, taking advantage of his declining health to steal property that was rightfully mine." Brian's smile never wavered, but his eyes turned cold. "That's quite an imagination you have. Perhaps your recent difficulties have affected your judgment. I think it might be best if you left." "I'm not going anywhere," I stated firmly. "This is my property, and I have proof that you fraudulently acquired it." I moved toward the stairs, determined to find Dad's journal in the master bedroom. Kimberly grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't you dare make a scene," she whispered furiously. I wrenched my arm free and addressed the nearest group of guests. "I'd like to make an announcement," I said loudly. "My name is Samantha Reynolds. This lodge belonged to my father, who was taken advantage of while suffering from dementia. If you're doing business with the Davidsons, you might want to know about their history of elder abuse and fraud." The room fell silent. Brian's pleasant facade cracked, his face flushing with anger. He signaled to someone, and suddenly 2 men in security uniforms appeared at my side. "Miss Reynolds is unwell," Brian announced to the room. "She's been under significant stress lately, and unfortunately has become delusional about property ownership. We've tried to accommodate her, but she's becoming disruptive." "Check the master bedroom closet," I called out as the security guards took my arms. "There's proof in my father's journal." I was half dragged, half carried out of the lodge, my protests falling on deaf ears. Brian followed us out to the driveway. "If you set foot on this property again without an invitation, I will have you arrested for trespassing," he said coldly. "And if you continue spreading these libelous accusations, you'll be hearing from our attorneys." The security guards placed me next to my car. "For what it's worth, ma'am," one of them said quietly, "this doesn't feel right." I spent that night in my car, parked at a scenic overlook a mile from the lodge. I was too angry to cry, too determined to give up. As I watched the lights of the party continue late into the night at what should have been my sanctuary, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to reclaim my property, I was going to expose the Davidsons for who they really were. I'm going to pause here for a moment because I know this feeling all too well. That moment when you realize you've hit rock bottom, and the only way forward is to fight back with everything you've got. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where you felt completely cornered but knew you had to stand your ground? Drop a comment below with your story. And hit that like button if you're ready to hear how I turned this situation around. Trust me, justice is coming, and it's going to be worth the wait. The next morning, I checked into the Mountain Pine Motel, a modest establishment on the outskirts of town. The room was basic but clean, and more importantly, it gave me a base of operations. I spread my documents across the bed and began formulating a plan. First, I called Emma Zhao, my college roommate who now worked in financial forensics. I explained the situation, and she agreed to help investigate the Davidson family's business dealings. "Give me 48 hours, she said. "I'll see what I can find." Next, I headed to the Aspen Peak Diner, a local establishment my father had frequented for years. As I hoped, several of Dad's old friends were there for their regular breakfast gathering. "Samantha!" called out Harold Peterson, a retired park ranger who had known my father for decades. "What brings you to town? We heard the lodge has new occupants." I slid into their booth and explained what had happened. The men exchanged concerned glances. "Tom was sharp as a tack until about 6 months before he passed," said George Williams, another longtime friend. "Then he started forgetting things, asking the same questions multiple times. We figured it was just age catching up." "Did you notice my sister or her husband around him during that time?" I asked. Harold nodded slowly. "Now that you mention it, they started showing up at his regular hangouts. Always very solicitous, insisting on driving him places, handling his business. We thought they were just being helpful. Your sister would often rush him out if we started talking about the old days or the lodge," added Bob Johnson, a third friend. "Almost like she didn't want him engaging with us too much." This was valuable testimony, but I needed more. I spent the rest of the morning visiting neighbors whose properties bordered the lodge. Most had noticed increased activity in the months before Dad's death: unfamiliar cars, construction equipment, surveyors walking the property lines. "Your dad seemed confused about all the activity," said Martha Wilson, our closest neighbor. "Once he came over asking if I knew who the people at his house were. When I said it was probably his daughter and son-in-law, he looked genuinely surprised." The most significant breakthrough came when I tracked down Patricia Gomez, the home health aide who had assisted Dad in his final months. Initially reluctant to speak with me, she finally agreed to meet at a coffee shop out of town. "I was only supposed to visit 3 times a week for a few hours," she explained. "But your sister and her husband insisted I document that I was there full time. When I questioned it, they said it was for insurance purposes." "Did you notice anything unusual about my father's behavior?" I asked. Patricia hesitated. "He had good days and bad days. Sometimes he was completely lucid, other times he seemed confused about basic things. But what concerned me most was how they isolated him. They would take his phone away when certain people called, saying he needed rest. They screened all his mail." "Did you document any of this?" She nodded. "I keep detailed notes on all my patients. It's standard practice. And I was concerned enough that I made additional personal notes about what I was observing." This was exactly what I needed. I asked if she would be willing to share her records and potentially testify if necessary. After some consideration, she agreed. With growing evidence of potential elder abuse and fraud, I knew I needed specialized legal representation. Through Rachel's connections, I secured a consultation with Judith Morgan, one of the top elder abuse attorneys in the state. After reviewing my evidence, Judith's assessment was blunt. "This has all the hallmarks of a calculated scheme to manipulate a vulnerable person. The timing of the will changes, the documented cognitive decline, the emails showing premeditation. It's a strong case." "Strong enough to invalidate the new will?" I asked. "Potentially. But the Davidsons won't go down without a fight. They have money and connections. We need to be thorough." Meanwhile, Emma had been digging into the Davidsons' finances. What she found was illuminating. "Their luxury car dealership empire isn't as solid as it appears," she reported over the phone. "They've been leveraging properties to cover cash flow problems for years. Brian's father made some bad investments, and they've been scrambling to acquire new assets to use as collateral for loans. So they needed the lodge as a financial lifeline," I realized. "Exactly. And it's not the first time they've done something like this. I found 3 similar situations: properties acquired under questionable circumstances from elderly individuals. The difference is, those victims either didn't have the resources to fight back or were paid off to stay quiet. This information gave me both hope and determination. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was potentially exposing a pattern of predatory behavior. Through a friend of a friend, I connected with Detective James Harris of the County Sheriff's Department. While he couldn't open an official investigation based solely on my suspicions, he agreed to look into the situation unofficially. Financial crimes against the elderly are often overlooked, he explained. But they're very real and devastating. If there's evidence of a pattern here, it could become a criminal matter. My next challenge was accessing the lodge to find Dad's journal. With Brian's threat of trespassing charges hanging over me, I needed to be strategic. I remembered Dad mentioning that he had installed security cameras around the property after a break-in at a neighboring cabin. If those cameras were still operational, they might have captured interactions between Dad, Kimberly, and the Davidsons during his final months. I contacted the security company listed on a bill I found among Dad's papers. Presenting my identification and proof of my connection to the property, I requested access to the archived footage. The system uploads to cloud storage, the technician explained. Your father set it up that way as a backup. I can grant you access to the account since you're listed as an authorized user. Hours of footage showed a disturbing pattern: Kimberly and Brian leading Dad through the house, showing him papers, him looking confused. In one particularly troubling clip, Dad appeared to be asking to leave the property, with Brian physically guiding him back inside. With each piece of evidence, my case grew stronger. I worked with Judith to prepare a comprehensive legal challenge to the will's validity, based on 1. Dad's documented cognitive decline, 2. Evidence of undue influence, 3. My partial ownership of the property through financial contribution, 4. The pattern of isolation and manipulation, evident in witness testimonies and security footage, 5. The Davidsons' financial motivation to acquire the property. We also drafted a cease and desist letter regarding the unauthorized renovations and use of the property while ownership was in dispute. My final breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing Dad's bank records, I noticed a safety deposit box I hadn't known about. With a court order obtained by Judith, I gained access to the box. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence: Dad's original, notarized will, leaving the lodge explicitly to me, dated just 6 months before his death. A letter explaining his wishes and concerns, that Kimberly and her new family were pressuring him. And most damning of all, a medical report confirming early-stage dementia, dated 1 month before the will was supposedly changed. As I assembled my team of experts, witnesses, and evidence, I felt confident for the first time since finding Kimberly in the lodge. The Davidsons had resources and connections, but I had truth on my side, and now, the evidence to prove it. Armed with our evidence, Judith and I filed a comprehensive legal challenge to the will's validity in county court. We requested an emergency injunction to prevent further renovations or changes to the property while the case was pending. The filing detailed Dad's cognitive decline, the suspicious circumstances of the will modification, and my pre-existing financial stake in the property. The response was swift. Within hours, I received a call from Brian's attorney, a senior partner at one of Denver's most prestigious firms. His message was clear: drop the case or face a prolonged, expensive legal battle that would drain my resources and potentially damage my professional reputation. The Davidsons are prepared to countersue for defamation, the attorney warned. Think carefully about proceeding with these baseless accusations. I wasn't intimidated. Tell your clients to prepare for discovery, I replied. I look forward to their depositions under oath. Meanwhile, Emma's investigation into the Davidson family business was bearing fruit. She discovered that their car dealership empire was heavily leveraged, with several locations underperforming. They had taken out significant loans using various properties as collateral, including, most recently, the Mountain Lodge. They're on thin ice financially, Emma explained. If word gets out about their business troubles, it could trigger loan covenants and force immediate repayment they can't afford. This information gave us leverage, but we needed to be strategic about using it. Through careful channels, we ensured that key findings from Emma's research were shared with business journalists who had previously covered the Davidson family's apparent success. Michael Chen, a reporter for the Denver Business Journal, took particular interest in the story. He reached out to me for comment on what he called troubling discrepancies in the Davidson family's business reporting. While I declined to comment directly on pending litigation, I provided context about the dispute over the lodge. The resulting article, Davidson Auto Empire, Cracks in the Foundation, raised questions about the family's business practices and mentioned the ongoing legal battle over the mountain property as a potential symptom of financial desperation. The article sent shockwaves through the Davidsons' business community. Partners and investors began asking questions, and rumors of instability spread quickly. 3 days after the article was published, I received an unexpected call from Kimberly. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, her voice tight with fury. "You're destroying Brian's family business with these lies." "I haven't said anything that isn't true," I replied calmly. "If their business can't withstand basic scrutiny, that's hardly my fault." "This has gone too far," Kimberly said, her tone suddenly shifting. "Maybe we can work something out." A compromise. The change in tactics was telling. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a cafe in town, to discuss terms, but insisted on having my attorney present. Kimberly agreed, suggesting it would be just the two of us as sisters with our respective legal counsel. The cafe meeting was tense from the start. Kimberly arrived with not just her attorney, but Brian as well. I had Judith beside me, along with a paralegal taking notes. "Let's cut to the chase," Brian began, all pretense of friendliness gone. "We're prepared to offer you a generous settlement. You can have exclusive use of the lodge for 1 month each year, and we'll pay you fair market value for your alleged investment in the property." Judith and I exchanged glances. Their offer wasn't even close to acceptable. "That's not going to work," I replied. "The lodge is rightfully mine, both legally and morally. My father's true wishes were clear before he was manipulated during a vulnerable time." "You can't prove that," Kimberly snapped. "Actually, we can," Judith interjected, sliding copies of the safety deposit box documents across the table. "These were found in Mr. Reynolds' safety deposit box. Note the neurologist's diagnosis and the date." As Kimberly and Brian reviewed the documents, I noticed something I hadn't expected: genuine shock on my sister's face. She looked up at Brian, who avoided her gaze. "You told me Dad was just getting old," she whispered to him. "You said he was fine when we had him change the will." It was a revealing moment. Brian quickly tried to regain control of the situation, but something had shifted. In her surprise, Kimberly had inadvertently confirmed that Brian had been the driving force behind the scheme. As the meeting continued, tensions escalated. Brian became increasingly aggressive, eventually threatening to make your life a living hell if you pursue this. Unbeknownst to him, the paralegal was recording the conversation with my prior consent legal in our state with single-party approval. When Brian realized he had overplayed his hand, he abruptly ended the meeting, practically dragging Kimberly out of the cafe. But not before she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between anger, confusion, and perhaps a flicker of guilt. The Davidson family's response to our legal challenge quickly turned aggressive. Private investigators began following me around town, questioning my associates and colleagues in New York. Rumors started circulating about my mental health and obsession with the property. A temporary restraining order was filed against me, claiming I had been harassing the Davidsons and trespassing on the property. The allegations were fabricated, but it served their purpose of keeping me away from the lodge while the case proceeded. Then things took a darker turn. One night, returning to my motel room, I found the door ajar. Inside, the room had been ransacked. My laptop was gone, along with the physical copies of my most important documents. Fortunately, I had digitized everything and stored backups securely online and with Judith's office. I reported the break-in to Detective Harris, who took it seriously but warned me that proving who was behind it would be difficult. "These people play dirty," he cautioned. "Watch your back." Despite the intimidation tactics, our case continued to build momentum. Dad's old business partners, hearing about the dispute, came forward with additional evidence of his cognitive decline in the months before his death. They described meetings where he seemed confused about basic details of projects he had designed, and mentioned Kimberly and Brian's constant presence at these meetings. Through Emma's continued investigation, we discovered a network of offshore accounts connected to the Davidson family, suggesting possible tax evasion or other financial improprieties. This information was carefully shared with relevant authorities. The most significant development came when concerned shareholders in the Davidsons' primary holding company called an emergency board meeting to address the mounting allegations of financial mismanagement and potential fraud. Brian was forced to attend, leaving Kimberly to manage the ongoing legal battle alone. With Brian temporarily distracted, I made a strategic decision. Through back channels, I reached out directly to Kimberly with the full evidence package we had assembled, including parts she hadn't seen at the cafe. I included a personal note: Kim, I understand you may not have known the full extent of what was happening. Dad loved us both. It's not too late to do the right thing. For days, there was no response. Then, as the Davidson family's business crisis deepened, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Alone. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the fishing spot. The fishing spot was a secluded area by the lake where Dad had taught us both to fish as children. It was a place with significance. Only Kimberly and I would understand, a sign that perhaps, somewhere beneath the years of resentment and competition, my sister was still in there. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the hearing. News of the dispute had spread throughout the county, with many locals turning out to witness what had become the talk of Aspen Peak. The Davidson family sat on one side, their team of attorneys creating a wall of expensive suits and leather briefcases. Kimberly sat among them, but notably separate from Brian. Our side was smaller, but focused Judith, her two associates, Emma as our financial expert, and me. The judge, Eleanor Simmons, had a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and a strong stance against elder abuse. Judith's opening statement was powerful and direct. This case, she began, is about more than a property dispute. It is about the exploitation of a vulnerable man in cognitive decline, manipulated by individuals who saw him not as a person to be protected, but as an asset to be acquired. The Davidsons' lead attorney countered with arguments about family harmony, suggesting I was the one causing division out of jealousy over Kimberly's stable family life compared to my failed marriage. It was a low blow that earned him a stern look from Judge Simmons. Over the next 3 days, we presented our case methodically. Dr. Martinez testified about Dad's concerning symptoms in the months before his death. Patricia Gomez's detailed notes provided a timeline of increasing confusion and isolation. The security footage showed visibly troubling interactions between Dad and the Davidsons. Perhaps most compelling was the testimony of William Jenkins, Dad's estate attorney. Under oath, and with his attorney present, he admitted that he had concerns about Dad's capacity when the will was changed. In retrospect, Jenkins stated, "I should have requested a formal capacity assessment. Mr. Reynolds was not himself that day. He seemed confused and kept looking to Mrs. Davidson and her husband for guidance on decisions that should have been his alone." When questioned about why he proceeded despite these concerns, Jenkins' answer was telling, "The Davidsons are influential clients. Their family has used our firm for generations." Kimberly's testimony came on the 4th day. She appeared nervous, repeatedly contradicting herself about when she first noticed Dad's cognitive issues. When confronted with the evidence that Brian had known about Dad's diagnosis before the will change, she appeared genuinely shocked. "I didn't know about any formal diagnosis," she insisted, her voice breaking. "Brian handled all the meetings with doctors. He told me Dad was just getting forgetful but was still capable of making decisions." The most dramatic moment came during Brian's cross-examination. Confident and dismissive at first, his composure cracked when Judith presented emails showing he had researched challenging dementia diagnosis and requirements for testamentary capacity months before the will was changed. "You knew Thomas Reynolds was suffering from cognitive decline when you orchestrated these changes to his will, didn't you, Mr. Davidson?" Judith pressed. "I was protecting my wife's interests," Brian snapped. Samantha had manipulated her father for years. Why should she get everything? The courtroom buzzed at this apparent admission. Judge Simmons called for order. The turning point came on the fifth day when Brian's former executive assistant, Lauren Taylor, took the stand as a surprise witness. She had approached our team after reading about the case in the local paper. Mr. Davidson instructed me to research properties owned by elderly individuals in the area, Lauren testified. He was particularly interested in Thomas Reynolds Lodge because of its location and potential value. This was approximately 14 months before Mr. Reynolds passed away. Lauren produced emails and notes from meetings where Brian had specifically discussed targeting Dad's property, calling it an undervalued asset we need to secure. When Brian's father took the stand to counter these allegations, he appeared frail and nervous. Under Judith's skilled questioning, he eventually admitted that the Davidson family had been facing financial difficulties and needed additional assets to secure new financing. "We were trying to protect the family business," he insisted. Thomas understood that. He wanted to help. When asked to explain how Dad understood this, despite documented cognitive decline, Gerald Davidson collapsed in his chair, requiring a brief recess for medical attention. After a week of testimony, Judge Simmons granted our request for temporary access to the property while she considered her ruling. Accompanied by the sheriff and Detective Harris, I returned to the lodge for the first time in weeks. The property had been further transformed. Expensive furniture filled every room, and construction equipment surrounded the property where they had apparently been planning an expansion. Most concerning was the evidence of damage and neglect, water stains on the ceiling from ignored leaks. Dad's antique furniture piled carelessly in the garage, his prized fishing equipment thrown haphazardly into storage bins. As I walked through what had once been my sanctuary, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about ownership, it was about stewardship of something precious my father had created. In the master bedroom, now stripped of Dad's personal touches, I headed straight for the closet. The loose floorboard was still there, though it had been partially covered by a new built-in shoe rack. I pried it up, heart racing. The space appeared empty at first, but when I reached deeper, my fingers touched something. I pulled out a small leather-bound book, Dad's journal, still in its hiding place after all this time. I spent that night at the lodge, reading Dad's final thoughts by the fireplace he had built with his own hands. His entries started lucid and detailed, recording his activities and reflections. But around 8 months before his death, the writing became erratic, with repeated questions and concerns about Kimberly's husband and his family taking over. One entry from just weeks before his death read, "Something isn't right. I keep forgetting things. Kim and Brian say they're handling everything, but I can't remember agreeing to some of these changes. I told Samantha the lodge would be hers. Did I change my mind? I don't think so. Need to talk to Jenkins again, alone this time." This journal was the final piece of evidence we needed. When court reconvened the next day, Judith presented it as a last-minute discovery. Judge Simmons admitted it into evidence over strenuous objections from the Davidsons' attorneys. After reviewing the journal entries, Judge Simmons called for closing arguments. Judith summarized our case concisely, emphasizing the clear pattern of exploitation and the documented evidence of Dad's diminished capacity. The Davidsons' attorney attempted to undermine the journal's authenticity and argued that regardless of Thomas Reynolds' mental state, the legal documents were properly executed. As we awaited the judge's ruling, a commotion broke out at the Davidsons' table. Kimberly had stood up and was whispering heatedly with Brian. After a tense exchange, she walked directly to our table. "I need to speak with the judge," she announced. Despite objections from Brian's attorneys, Judge Simmons allowed Kimberly to address the court. "I want to withdraw my claim to the property," Kimberly stated, her voice shaking. "After seeing all the evidence, especially my father's journal, I can't continue this. Brian told me Dad wanted us to have equal ownership. I didn't know about the diagnosis or that Dad was being pressured." She turned to face me directly. "I'm sorry, Sam. I let resentment and Brian's influence cloud my judgment. Dad always wanted you to have the lodge. You paid for half of it, and you were the one who shared his love for that place." Brian erupted, shouting accusations at Kimberly until Judge Simmons threatened him with contempt of court. 2 days later, Judge Simmons delivered her ruling. The modified will was invalid due to clear evidence of undue influence and Thomas Reynolds' diminished capacity at the time of signing. The original will would stand, with the mountain lodge belonging solely to me as initially intended. Furthermore, the judge referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges of elder abuse and fraud against Brian Davidson and his father. The Davidson family would also be responsible for returning all personal items removed from the property and restoring any damage caused by their unauthorized renovations. As I left the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions. I simply stated, "Today, justice was served not just for me, but for my father. No one should be taken advantage of in their vulnerable moments, especially by those they trusted." The victory was bittersweet. I had won back my sanctuary, but lost my sister, though perhaps she had been lost to me long before this battle began. As for the Davidsons, their legal troubles were just beginning, with investigations into their business practices launched by multiple agencies following the evidence presented in our case. The first night I spent in the lodge after legally reclaiming it was both triumphant and melancholy. I sat on the porch where Dad and I had spent countless evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. The physical space was mine again, but restoring it to the sanctuary it once was would take time. In the weeks that followed, criminal charges were indeed filed against Brian and Gerald Davidson for elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. Their business empire began to crumble as other victims came forward with similar stories of predatory behavior. Brian's mother, Nancy, filed for divorce amid the scandal, revealing she had been kept in the dark about many of the family's questionable business practices. Kimberly's situation was more complex. While she avoided criminal charges by cooperating with authorities, her marriage to Brian imploded. One afternoon, she appeared at the lodge, hesitant and clearly nervous. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said when I opened the door. "I just wanted to return these." She handed me a box containing family photos and mementos she had taken from the lodge, including Dad's fishing lures and the hand-carved chess set Mom had given him before she passed. "I really didn't know how bad it was," she continued. "I was angry that you always seemed to be Dad's favorite, that you had this successful career while I kept failing. When Brian came along and seemed so interested in me, in my family, I wanted to believe he cared for the right reasons. I invited her in for coffee, not ready to forgive but willing to listen. We sat at the kitchen table where our family had shared countless meals, two sisters trying to navigate the wreckage of trust destroyed. "What will you do now?" I asked after she explained how Brian had manipulated both her and Dad. "Start over," she replied. "Somewhere new. I've contacted a therapist to work through why I was so vulnerable to someone like Brian, and I've applied to finish my degree." Before she left, I gave her the box of childhood drawings Dad had kept, half hers, half mine. A small gesture, not of forgiveness quite yet, but of acknowledgement that we shared a history that predated all of this. The restoration of the lodge became my healing project. I took a sabbatical from my law firm, originally planning to stay for a month but eventually extending to 3. Frank Miller and other local craftsmen who had known Dad helped repair the damage done by the Davidsons' renovations. "Your dad would be proud," Frank told me, as we reinstalled the original hand-carved banister that I'd found discarded in the garage. "He built this place to last generations." I discovered unexpected support from the community. Dad's friends brought casseroles and offered help with repairs. Detective Harris checked in regularly, ensuring there were no further attempts by the Davidsons to harass me. Even William Jenkins, the estate attorney, made amends by offering free legal services to establish the Thomas Reynolds Foundation. The foundation became my way of honoring Dad's memory while preventing others from suffering similar exploitation. Using a portion of the settlement from the Davidsons, who had been ordered to pay substantial damages, I established a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elderly individuals from financial abuse and providing legal resources to victims. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through the last of Dad's belongings, I discovered something I had missed: a sealed envelope taped to the back of his favorite family photograph. Inside was a letter, dated just 1 month before his death, during what must have been a moment of clarity. Sammy, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I'm having more and more trouble remembering things, and I'm worried about what that means. Kimberly's husband and his family are here constantly now. They're helping with my finances, but something doesn't feel right. I want you to know that the lodge is yours, as we always planned. You paid for half of it, but more importantly, you're the one who truly loves it the way I do. I've tried to make this clear legally, but if anything happens, fight for it. It's your sanctuary, just as it was mine. I'm proud of you, Sammy. Always have been. Whatever happens, remember that. Love, Dad. Reading his words brought both tears and resolution. I had fulfilled his wishes and protected his legacy. The victory wasn't just about property, it was about honoring his intentions and standing up against those who would exploit vulnerability for gain. As for my own life, the experience transformed me in ways I hadn't expected. I resigned from my position at the New York firm, choosing instead to open a small practice in Aspen Peak, specializing in elder law and estate planning. The pace was slower, the cases more meaningful, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing work that mattered. The lodge became my primary residence, though I maintained a small apartment in town for the winter months when the mountain road became treacherous. I established a tradition of hosting Dad's old friends for fishing weekends in the summer and quiet dinners by the fireplace in fall. 1 year after reclaiming the lodge, I received an unexpected email from Kimberly with a photo attached. She had completed her first semester back at college, making the dean's list. The photo showed her standing proudly in front of her apartment building, looking healthier and more genuinely happy than I had seen her in years. I replied with congratulations and attached a picture of my own, the newly installed memorial bench overlooking the lake, engraved with Dad's favorite saying, "The best view comes after the hardest climb." It was a small step toward healing our fractured relationship, one that might never fully mend but could perhaps evolve into something new, built on honesty rather than competition. As I sit on the porch tonight, watching another magnificent sunset paint the mountains, I reflect on the journey of the past 18 months. The lodge is once again a sanctuary, not unchanged, but perhaps stronger for having weathered the storm. Like the mountains themselves, some things endure despite the forces that try to wear them down. I hope my story serves as both a warning and inspiration. Family dynamics can be complicated and sometimes toxic, but standing up for what's right matters, especially when it's difficult. If you've ever faced betrayal from those who should have protected you, know that you're not alone. Justice may be slow, but it's worth fighting for. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more true family stories. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you or someone you love? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you know someone facing similar battles, please share this video. Sometimes knowing others have fought and won gives us the strength to keep going. Until next time, remember that your story matters, your boundaries matter, and sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we're born into.